Episode 6 of Pilgrim's Progress. The Can't say the return of the series. This is something that it's one of those ongoing projects that I'm doing. There was this really, really bad movie that was not terribly family friendly, but there was a scene in there. One of the themes in the movie was how a lot of people, get through life not being able to read. Um, I remember seeing in the library in Ogden statistics that was like 60 something percent of adults in this area of Utah do not know how to read. And that's in 2019. Can I say that is scary? And I'm under no illusions that I will make the whole entire world able to read. But the purpose of this and every other book that will be read on this channel or these channels is to provide a means through which, if people desire, they can learn how to read. But I want to say the catalyst for today's stream was just something I saw on Instagram that was forwarded to me. And it was another one of those, well, how can these things happen in 2019, seeing that we are founded by the Declaration of Independence? It's a hard issue. I don't say that glibly. I says until we can face the truth of our state of our nation, we won't be able to make long going change. Again, not something that I believe I can do overnight. But once again, every little step, every nudge in the right direction matters. Okay. Thank you for coming to my Bill Talk. We will continue with episode 6 of Pilgrim's Progress. By Inns and Silver, Dameth both agree. One calls, the other runs, that he may be a sharer in his lucre. So these do take up in this world and no further go. Now, I saw that just on the other side of this plan. Man, my mouse and I are not on the same page. So I will say again. Now, I saw that just on the other side of this plain, the pilgrims came to a place where stood an old monument, hard by the highway side, at the sight of which they were both concerned, because of the strangeness of the form thereof, for it seemed to them as if it had been a woman transformed into the shape of a pillar. Here, therefore, they stood looking and looking upon it, but could not for a time tell what they should make thereof. At last, Hopeful espied written above the head thereof a writing in an unusual hand, but he being no scholar, called a Christian, for he was learned, to see if he could pick out the meaning. So he came, and after a little laying of letters together, he found the same to be this: Remember Lot's wife. So he read it to his fellow, after which they both concluded that that was the pillar of salt into which Lot's wife was turned, for her looking back with a covetous heart when she was going from Sodom for safety. Genesis 19 and 26, which sudden and amazing sight gave them occasion of this discourse. Ah, my brother, this is a seasonable sight. It came opportunely to us after the invitation which Damas gave us to come over to view the hill Lucre. And had we gone over as he desired us, and as thou wast inclined to do, my brother, we had, for aught I know, been made ourselves like this woman, a spectacle for those that shall come after to behold. I am sorry that I was so foolish, and am made to wonder what I am not now as Lot's wife. For wherein was the difference between her sin and mine? She only looked back, and I had a desire to go see. Let grace be adored, and let me be ashamed that ever such a thing should be in my heart. Let us take notice of what we see here, for our help for time to come. This woman escaped one judgment, for she fell not by the destruction of Sodom. Yet she was destroyed by another. As we see, she is turned into a pillar of salt. True, and she may be to us both caution and example. Caution that we should shun her sin, or a sign of what judgment will overtake, such as shall not be prevented by this caution. So Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, with the 250 men that perished in their sin, did also become a sign or example to others to beware. Numbers 26, 9 and 10. But above all, I muse at one thing, to wit, how Damas and his fellows can stand so confidently yonder to look for that treasure, which this woman, but for looking behind her after, for we read not that she stepped 1 foot out of the way, was turned into a pillar of salt, especially since the judgment which overtook her did not make her an example within sight of where they are. For they cannot choose but see her, did they but lift up their eyes. It is a thing to be wondered at, and it argueth that their hearts are grown desperate in the case. And I cannot tell who to compare them to so fitly as to them that pick pockets in the presence of the judge, or that will cut purses under the gallows. It is said of the men of Sodom that they were sinners exceedingly, because they were sinners before the Lord, that is, in his eyesight. And notwithstanding the kindness that he had showed them, Genesis 13 and 13, for the land of Sodom was now like the Garden of Eden heretofore, Genesis 13 and 10. This, therefore, provoked him the more to jealousy, and made their plague as hot as the fire of the Lord out of heaven could make it. And it is most rationally to be concluded that such, even such as these are, that shall sin in the sight, yea, and that too, in despite of such examples that are set continually before them, to caution them to the contrary, must be partakers of the severest of judgments. Doubtfully thou hast said the truth, but what a mercy is it that neither thou, but especially I, am not made myself this example. This meritoreth occasion to us to thank God, to fear before him, and always to remember Lot's wife. I saw, then, that they went on their way to a pleasant river, which David the king called the river of God, but John the river of the water of life. Psalm 65 and 9, Revelations 22, and Ezekiel 47. Now their way lay just upon the bank of the river. Here, therefore, Christian and his companion walked with great delight, and enlivening to their weary spirits. Besides, on the banks of this river, on either side were green trees, that bore all manner of fruit, and the leaves of the trees were good for medicine. With the fruit of these trees they were also much delighted, and the leaves they eat to prevent surfeits and other diseases that are incident to those that heat their blood by travels. On either side of the river was also a meadow, curiously beautified with lilies, and it was green all the year long. In this meadow they lay down and slept, for here they might lie down safely. When they awoke, they gathered again of the fruit of the trees, and drank again of the water of the rivers, and then lay down again to sleep. Psalms 23 and 2, Isaiah 14 and 30. Thus they did several days and nights. Then they sang, Behold, ye, how these crystal streams do glide, to comfort pilgrims by their highway side. The meadows green, besides their fragrant smell, yield dainties for them. And he that can tell what pleasant fruit, yea, leaves those trees do yield, will soon sell all, that he may buy this field. So when they were disposed to go on, for they were not as yet at their journey's end, they ate and drank and departed. Now I beheld in my dream that they had not journeyed far, but the river and the way for a time parted, at which they were not a little sorry. Yet they durst not go out of the way. Now the way from the river was rough, and their feet tender by reason of their travels. So the souls of the pilgrims were much discouraged because of the way. Numbers 21 and 4. Wherefore still, as they went on, they wished for better way. Now a little before them there was on the left hand of the road a meadow, and a stile to go over into it, and that meadow is called Bypath Meadow. Then said Christian to his fellow, If this meadow lieth along by our wayside, let us go over into it. Then he went to the stile to see, and behold, a path lay along by the way. On the other side of the fence, it is according to my wish, said Christian. Here is the easiest going. Come, good hopeful, and let us go over. But how if this path should lead us out of the way? That is not like, said the other. Look, doth it not go along by the wayside? So Hopeful, being persuaded by his fellow, went after him over the stile. When they were gone over, and were got into the path, they found it very easy to for their feet. And withal, they, looking before them, espied a man walking as they did, and his name was Vain Confidence. So they called after him, and asked him whither that way led. He said, To the celestial gate. Look, said Christian, did not I tell you so? By this ye may see we are right. So they followed, and he went before them. But behold, the night came on, and it grew very dark, so that they that were behind lost the sight of him that went before. He, therefore, that went before, Vain Confidence by name, not seeing the way before him, fell into a deep pit, Isaiah 9 and 16, which was on purpose there made by the prince of those grounds, to catch vainglorious fools withal, and was dashed in pieces with his fall. Now Christian and his fellow heard him fall, so they called to know the matter. But there was none to answer, only they heard a groaning. Then said Hopeful, Where are we now? Then was this fellow silent, as mistrusting that he had led them out of the way. And now it began to rain, and thunder, and lighten in a very dreadful manner, and the water rose amain. Then Hopeful groaned in himself, saying, Oh, that I had kept on my way. Who could have thought that this path should have led us out of the way? I was afraid of it at the very first, and therefore gave you that gentle caution. I would have spoken plainer, but that you are older than I. Good brother, be not offended. I am sorry I have brought thee out of the way, and that I have put thee into such imminent danger. Pray, my brother, forgive me. I did not do it of an evil intent. Be comforted, my brother, for I forgive thee, and believe too that this shall be for our good. I am glad that I have with me a merciful brother, but we must not stand thus. Let us try to go back again. But, good brother, let me go before. No, if you please, let me go first, that if there be any danger, I may be the first therein, because by my means we are both gone out of the way. No, said Hopeful, you shall not go first, for your mind being troubled may lead you out of the way again. Then for their encouragement they heard the voice of one saying, Set thine heart toward the highway, even the way which thou wentest, turn again. Jeremiah 31 and 21. But by this time the waters were greatly risen, by reason of which the way of going back was very dangerous. Then I thought that it is easier going out of the way when we are in it than going in when we are out. Yet they have ventured to go back, but it was so dark, and the flood was so high, that in their going back they had like to have been drowned 9 or 10 times. Neither could they, with all the skill they had, get again to the stile that night. Wherefore at last, lightening under a little shelter, they sat down there until the daybreak. But, being weary, they fell asleep. Now there was, not far from the place where they lay, a castle called Doubting Castle, the owner whereof was Giant Despair. And it was in his grounds that they now were sleeping. Wherefore he, getting up in the morning early and walking up and down in his fields, caught Christian and Hopeful asleep in his grounds. Then, with a grim and surly voice, he bid them awake, and asked them whence they were, and what they did in his grounds. They told them that they were pilgrims, and that they had lost their way. Then said the giant, You have this night trespassed on me, by trampling in and lying on my grounds, and therefore you must go along with me. So they were forced to go, because he was stronger than they. They also had but little to say, for they knew themselves in a fault. The giant thereof drove them before him, and put them into his castle, into a very dark dungeon, nasty and stinking to the spirits of these two men. Psalms 88 and 18. Here, then, they lay from Wednesday morning till Saturday night, without one bit of bread, or drop of drink, or light, or any to ask how they did. They were therefore here in evil case, and were far from friends and acquaintance. Now in this place Christian had double sorrow, because through his unadvised counsel that they were brought into this distress. The pilgrims now, to gratify the flesh, will seek its ease, but oh, how they afresh do thereby plunge themselves new griefs into, who seek to please the flesh themselves undo. Now, Giant Despair had a wife, and her name was Diffidence. So when he was going to bed, he told his wife what he had done, to wit, that he had taken a couple of prisoners and cast them into his dungeon for trespassing on his ground. Then he asked her also what he had best to do further to them. So she asked him what they were, whence they came, and whither they were bound. And he told her. Then she counseled him that when he arose in the morning, he should beat them without any mercy. So when he arose, he giveth them a grievous crabtree cudgel, and goes down into the dungeon to them, and there first falls to rating of them as if they were dogs, although they never gave him a word of distaste. Then he falls upon them and beats them fearfully in such sort that they were not able to help themselves, or to turn them upon the floor. This done, he withdraws, and leaves them there to condole their misery, and to mourn under their distress. So all that day they spent the time in nothing but sighs and bitter lamentations. The next night she, talking with her husband about them further, and understanding that they were yet alive, did advise them to counsel them to make away themselves. So when morning was come, he goes to them in a surly manner as before, and perceiving them to be very sore with the stripes that he had given them the day before, he told them that since they were never like to come out of that place, their only way would be forthwith to make an end of themselves, either with knife, halter, or poison. For why, said he, should you choose life, seeing it is attended with so much bitterness? But they desired him to let them go. With that he looked ugly upon them, and rushing to them, had doubtless made an end of them himself, but that he fell into one of his fits. For he sometimes in sunshiny weather fell into fits, and lost for a time the use of his hand. Wherefore he withdrew, and left them as before, to consider what to do. Then did the prisoners consult between themselves whether it was best to take his counsel or no. And thus they began to discourse. Brother, said Christian, what shall we do? The life that we now live is miserable. For my part, I know not whether is best to live thus or to die out of hand. My soul chooses strangling rather than life, and the grave is more easy for me than this dungeon. Job 7:15. Shall we be ruled by the giant? Indeed, our present condition is dreadful, and death would be far more welcome to me than thus forever to abide. But yet, let us consider. The Lord of the country to which we are going hath said, Thou shalt do no murder. No, not to take another man's person. Much more then are we forbidden to take his counsel to kill ourselves. Besides, he that kills another can but commit murder upon his body. But for one to kill himself is to kill body and soul at once. And moreover, my brother, thou talkest of ease in the grave, but hast thou forgotten the hell for certain the murderers go? For no murderer hath eternal life. And let us consider again that all the law is not in the hand of giant despair. Others, so far as I can understand, have been taken by him as well as we, and yet have escaped out of his hand. Who knows? But the God that made the world may cause that giant despair may die, or that at some time or another he may forget to lock us in, or that he may in a short time have another of his fits before us, and may lose the use of his limbs. And if ever that should come to pass again, for my part, I am resolved to pluck up the heart of a man, and to try my utmost to get from under his hand. I was a fool that I did not try to do it before, but however, my brother, let us be patient and endure a while. The time may come that may give us a happy release, but let us not be our own murderers. With these words, Hopeful at present did moderate the mind of his brother. So they continued together in the dark that day in their sad and doleful condition. Well, towards evening, the giant goes down into the dungeon again to see if his prisoners had taken his counsel. But when he came there, he found them alive, and truly alive was all. For now, what for want of bread and water, and by reason of the wounds they received when he beat them, they could do little but breathe. But I say he found them alive, at which he fell into a grievous rage, and told them that, seeing they had disobeyed his counsel, it should be worse with them than if they had never been born. At this, they trembled greatly, and I think that Christian fell into a swoon. But coming a little to himself again, they renewed their discourse about the giant's counsel, and whether yet they had best to take it or no. Now Christian again seemed to be for doing it, but Hopeful made his second reply as follows. My brother, said he, rememberest thou not how valiant thou hast been heretofore? Apollyon could not crush thee, nor could all that thou didst hear or see or feel in the valley of the shadow of death. What hardship, terror, and amazements hast thou already gone through, and art thou now nothing but fear? Thou seest that I am in the dungeon with thee, a far weaker man by nature than thou art. Also this giant has wounded me as well as thee, and hath also cut off the bread and water from my mouth, and with thee I mourn without the light. But let us exercise a little more patience. Remember how thou playest the man at Vanity Fair, and was neither afraid of the chain nor cage, nor yet of the bloody death. Wherefore let us, at least to avoid the shame that becomes not a Christian to be found in, bear up with patience as well as we can. Now night being come again, and the giant and his wife being in bed, she asked them concerning the prisoners, and if they had taken his counsel. To which he replied, they are sturdy rogues. They choose rather to bear all hardship than to make away themselves. Then said she, take them into the castle yard tomorrow, and show them the bones and skulls of those that thou hast already dispatched, and make them believe ere a week comes to an end that thou also wilt tear them in pieces, as thou hast done their fellows before them. So when the morning was come, the giant goes to them again, and takes them into the castle yard, and shows them as his wife had bidden him. These, said he, were pilgrims as you are, once, and they trespassed in my grounds, as you have done. And when I threw fit, I tore them into pieces, and say within 10 days, I will do you. Go, get you down to your den again. And with that he beat them all the way thither. They lay, therefore, all day on Saturday in a lamentation case as before. Now when night was come, and when Miss Diffidus and her husband the giant were got to bed, they began to renew their discourse of their prisoners, and withal to lie in a sticking dungeon, when I may as well walk at liberty. I have a key in my bosom called Promise. That will, I am persuaded, open and lock in Doubting Castle. That then said Hopeful, that's good news, good brother. Pluck it out of thy bosom and try. Then Christian pulled it out of his bosom, and began to try at the dungeon door, whose bolt, as he turned the key, gave back. And the door flew open with ease, and Christian and Hopeful both came out. Then he went to the outward door that leads into the castle yard, and with his key opened that door also. Also he went to the iron gate, for that must be opened too, but that lock went damnable hard, and yet the key did not open it. Then they thrust open the gate to make their escape with speed. But that gate as it opened made such a creaking that it waked Giant Despair, who hastily rising to pursue his prisoners felt his limbs to fail, for his fits took him again, so that he could by no means go after them. Then they went on, and came to the king's highway again, and so were safe because they were out of his jurisdiction. Now when they were out over the stile, they began to continue with themselves what they should do at the stiles to prevent those that should come after from falling into the hands of Giant Despair. So they consented to erect there a pillar, and to engrave upon the side thereof this sentence: over this stile is the way to Doubting Castle, which is kept by Giant Despair, who despised the king of the celestial country, and seeks to destroy his holy pilgrims. Many therefore that followed after read what was written, and escaped the danger. This done, they sang as follows: Out of the way we went, and then we found what to tread upon forbidden ground. And let them that come after have a care, lest heedless make them as we to fare, lest they for trespassing his prisoners are, whose castle Doubting, and whose names Despair. They went then till they came to the Delectable Mountains, which mountains brought to the Lord of the Hills, which we have spoken before. So they went up to the mountains to behold the gardens and orchards, the vineyards and fountains of water, where also they drank and washed themselves, and did freely eat of the vineyards. Now there were on the tops of these mountains shepherds feeding their flocks, and they stood by the balcony side. Stood by the highway side. The pilgrims therefore went to them, and leaning upon their staves, as is common with weary pilgrims when they stand to talk with any of the way, they asked, whose delectable mountains are these, and whose be the sheep that feed upon them? Mountains delectable they now ascend, where shepherds be, which to them do command. Alluring things and things that caution are pilgrims are steady, kept by faith and fear. These mountains are Emmanuel's land, and they are within sight of his city. And the sheep also are his, and he laid down his life for them. John 10 and 11. Okay, we're going to end this episode as normal, as always. I apologize. Be well, be safe, be the best you that you can be.